Welcome to the first installment of a multi-part video series examining various perspectives of the question, what is Codex Oera Linda? This is part one of the first perspective, at face value, where I'll discuss the section of the Oera Linda manuscript called the Book of the Adela Followers, with a view to the historical context as portrayed in the book itself, without deference to mainstream historiological or historiographical parallels. My aim is to engage with the wisdom found through an impartial reading of these collected writings. Thus, I will not presently address the conventional wisdom that Codex Oera Linda is a 19th century fake, fraud, fiction, or Frisian mystification. Rather, at this point, I choose simply to suspend disbelief and delve into the story and its characters, their adventures and troubles, resulting sometimes from the whims of nature, but more often from their own decisions, deeds, and misdeeds. Taking Codex Oera Linda at face value is no easy task, because the people and places depicted so often align with well-known names that a degree of dissonance is unavoidable for any reader familiar with what has been called the history of Western civilization. Where to begin? Its fragmentary nature and the vast scope of time covered make it difficult to simply jump in and understand Codex Oera Linda. For instance, the Book of the Adela Followers begins with a flash forward in time, describing a scene circa 560 BCE before presenting a collection of stories that were ancient even then, encompassing events from the genesis of earthly life to the sinking of a continent called Atland to the immediate run-up of the starting scene. To further confound the novice reader, this initial part of the manuscript follows the letters of introduction that precede the book, which were written respectively in the years 1255 CE and 803 CE, when the manuscripts were last copied by succeeding generations of the Oera Linda family. What's more, the Book of the Adela Followers ends abruptly on page 87 after a story describing events some 30 years prior to the opening scene with the words, "Hail, end of the book." Yet the manuscript continues on without skipping a single line for a further 123 pages with stories, and sometimes stories within stories, written still later in time about the then relative past. To say the least, it can be challenging to work out just who is who and when what happened. But, since the narrative of Codex Oera Linda is largely character-driven, I will focus today on characters in their order of appearance. Please like and subscribe if you haven't, so more people can learn about the existence of Codex Oera Linda and join in the conversation. Adela has been mentioned. She was perhaps the most respected woman of her era, though she was never elected to the highest position in the land, that of Folksmother. The Freya society was largely matriarchal. Not that men were subservient to women, indeed the one god of this monotheistic people must be attributed male, and there were kings, reeves, and aldermen. But the Burgs, fortified installations within a ring wall which housed the maidens and the Burgmaids, represented the central pillar of authority in Freya's land, and the Folksmother, who sat at the Burg Tesland, had final decision-making power in many internal affairs of the various Freya states. Adela would have become Folksmother, but for the fact that she had fallen in love with a man named Apol and wished to be wed. This meant she could not become a mother of the people, whose full attention must be given to ensuring peace and domestic tranquility. Nonetheless, having been a maiden herself, as well as a Burgmaid for 3 years, she felt a deep sense of responsibility toward her people, and the book begins when she stands up at the assembly to voice her concerns about the encroaching Magyar hordes and the reaction of the Freya's leadership to this danger.
Long have I travelled, far and wide, to observe what was happening. In this way, many things have been revealed to me that others do not know. You said yesterday that our kinfolk on the other side of the Visa were meek and spineless, Yet I may tell you that the Magus did not conquer a single district by force of arms, but solely through deceitful intrigue, and still more through the greed of the military leaders and noblemen.
Apol had been a sea king who led marine expeditions for trade and in times of war. Later, he held the title Reeve of East Vlieland and the Linda regions, and was charged with the care of 3 important burgs. The Burg Liudgarda, one of those under Apol's care in his day, is described by their daughter Apollonia many years later in chapter 13h.
The tower has 6 sides and is 3 times 30 feet high, flat on top. A small observatory sits thereon, from which one watches the stars. On each side of the tower there is a hall, 300 feet long, 3 times 7 feet wide, and equally high, except for the roof, which is vaulted. Surrounding the burg is a dike, and around it a moat 3 times 7 feet deep, 3 times 12 feet wide. Looking down from the tower, one sees the shape of the Yule wheel. The 3 northerly buildings are filled with grain and other stocks. 2 on the south are for the teaching and housing of the young maidens. The southernmost is the Burgmaid's home. In the tower hangs the lamp, and the walls are bejewelled with precious stones.
The Book of the Adela followers is made up mainly of laws and several important histories copied from the walls of the burgs on the advice of Adela to protect them in cases of war or natural disaster. The threat that one or both of these things could occur was high at the time, given that the Magyar had already made slaves of the Finns and taken over Freya colonies in Scandinavia and mainland states all the way to the river Vesa from the east, and given that the sea had inundated and wreaked havoc over Freya's land very often over time. Adela recommends several actions designed to defend her people's freedom, the very highest virtue in Freya's culture. Indeed, freedom is the very name of Freya and the Freya folk, which must be translated as the free people, who were bound by their constitutional law, the Tess, neither to engage in nor to condone any form of slavery anywhere by anyone. An excerpt from Adela's advice.
Were I permitted to give my advice, I should say that, before anything else, you must elect a new Folksmother. I would also counsel you go to the burgs and copy all the laws, Freya's Tesh, all of the histories and everything else you can find on the walls, so that nothing will be lost if the burgs are destroyed. It is written there that the Folksmother and each burgmaid shall have, besides helpers and messengers, 21 maidens and 7 maiden apprentices. Were I to add something, it would be to write, and as many worthy daughters as the burgs can house to come and study. For I say, in truth, and time shall bear it out, if you wish your children to remain true friars, not to be conquered either by intrigue or force of arms, then you must see to it that your daughters become real friar women. You must teach the children how great our lands once were, what a great people our ancestors were, how great we are still compared to others. Tell them of the heroes, of their heroic deeds, and of distant sea voyages. These tales must be told by the hearth, around the homestead, or anywhere else, in times of joy and of tears. But for them to be etched into the minds and hearts, the teachings must flow from the lips of your wives and daughters.
All the things copied from the burg walls on Adela's advice constitute the first part of what we now call Codex Oera Linda, the only record of these prehistoric days. After the first account of Adela speaking in front of the assembly, the book takes the reader far, far back to the time before time, as the story is told of the one god, Varalda, and the beginning. After a brief outline of the Genesis, in which time emerges from the chaos to engender all creation, we are introduced to the mythical mothers of the 3 branches of the human family, Lyda, Finda, and Freya. Several times in the book, the people descended from these three mothers are referred to as half-brothers and sisters, sharing one father, Vralda, but each coming down unmingled from one of the three mothers, all of whom were born from the one mother, Irtha, Mother Earth, daughter of time. It bears repeating, however, that these primordial mothers were not considered goddesses, at least by the Freyas, nor were they immortal. Although there is no explicit mention of Freya's death, Freya did leave the earth and ascend to a watchstar like her sister Finda, who is indeed reported to have died, and Lida's death is also described. Before Freya ascended, she left her basic law, called the Tess, the vestige of which may still exist in the name of the North Sea island of Texel, north of Den Helder in modern-day West Friesland. The Book of the Adela followers encompasses at least 12 sections dedicated to further laws, punishments, and legal precedents, all based on the primordial principle of right and wrong called Éwa, said to be imprinted equally in the minds of all civilized people to judge their own deeds and those of others.
Éwa also means water-like, level and smooth as water that neither storm nor anything else has disturbed. When water is disturbed, it becomes uneven, unlevel, but it always has a tendency to become even again. That lies in its nature, just as the inclination towards justice and freedom reposes in Freya's children. We derive this disposition from our feeder, Vralda's spirit, which speaks strongly in Freya's children and shall thus remain with us eternally.
The interpreters and upholders of the law were the Folksmother at Tesland and the Burgmaids throughout the vastness of Freya's land, which stretched in the ancient past before the sinking of Atland, from the eastern end of the Baltic to what are now the British Isles and the gates of the Mediterranean in the west. The first Folksmother was the quasi-mythical Festa, who was recommended by Freya herself and given the task of writing down all the things Freya had had no chance to say while she was amongst her children. To this end, she developed a running cursive script based on the standing script, or Yule script, that Freya had devised. She had her seat at the Burg of Tesland, so named because it was the place where Freya had spoken her law before ascending from earth, and kept watch with her maidens over the eternal flame that burned there.
Then the lamp that I have lit for you shall never be extinguished. Its light will forever illuminate your minds, and you shall remain as free from domination as your sweet rivers are free from the brine of the endless sea.
All other burgs that would come after the first burg had a burgmaid and maidens of their own to watch over a lamp lit directly from the eternal flame at Tesland. Not much else is said about life on earth after Freya's ascension, except that it was good and bountiful, until catastrophe struck and the home of Finda's people, called Atland, was inundated and sank forever into the sea. Indeed, the sinking of the old country, which is the meaning of the word Atland, marked such a profound shift in the world that it became the 0 point of history for the Freyas, from which all other dates were derived. References like written in the 3449th year after Atland sank can be found throughout Codex Oera Linda. Freya's land was also severely impacted by the earth changes that sank Atland, as volcanoes erupted, forests burned, and rivers changed their courses. After 3 years of suffering such upheaval, it abated, and the people began life anew, in a world different to all they had previously known. In later ages, the story continued to be remembered on walls in longhouses at every burg.
Many lands were submerged, others had risen out of the sea, and half of the Twistland had been deforested. Bands of Finda's folk came roaming across the empty plains, and our dispersed people were either destroyed or joined their ranks. This forced us to be twice as vigilant, and time taught us that unity is our strongest defense.
And this is where the pre-Diluvian tales from the realm of myth begin to merge with historical accounts. Join me soon for part 2, in which, 101 years after Atland sank, the slavery-based Magyar tribes rise out of the east to trouble the children of Freya in the lands they had rebuilt, and a war between Burg launches a marine expedition that will alter the course of history.